Our next speaker today is Dr. Chris Walker. Chris is a Director of Covey Associates, as well as an Adjunct Associate Professor at the University of South Australia and the University of the Sunshine Coast. With significant experience in the design and management of green infrastructure and nature-based solutions, he's developed several novel water-sensitive urban design measures. He's managed major civil and green infrastructure projects across Australia, Asia and North America. Dr. Walker also works with universities and research organisations, including MIT and the CSIRO, on a range of research projects focused on water quality. Chris's topic today will be combining the blue and the green real-world benefits from integrating street tree health and stormwater treatment. Chris.
Okay, I'm really glad I went after Paul and Tony because they were really talking about a lot of what we're doing in this project per se. So what I'm going to talk about is a development called Pelican Waters in southeast Queensland, where we implemented a fairly novel approach to integrating stormwater treatment and street tree health enhancement. So rather than doing a shameless plug, really what I want to do is recognize the talent and skill of our staff. I'm here as a representative, and what these guys do day in, day out is really think outside the box, and that allows us to execute projects like I'm going to talk about today. And they really demonstrate what our company's core ethos is, which is to focus on innovation. So for context, that's a bioretention basin, and that really deals with stormwater treatment. You see them fairly consistently across urban development, and oftentimes you have basically two versions, at source or end of line, and I'll talk a little bit about that later. Other options are wetlands, and hopefully you're not seeing these implemented in place of natural wetlands like was discussed before by Tony, but rather as a mechanism to provide end-of-line treatment for large catchments where grade allows. For the green, that's really a landscape architecture. Here's a prime example of street tree implementation in urban setting, but it goes beyond that too. It's really about placemaking and community and creating that sense of belonging. That's a development that we did up on the Sunshine Coast that our landscape architect team designed the entirety of, and it really is a focal point of this community that's used day in, day out, and I happen to know that because I live there. So we have these two very powerful forces, but we don't necessarily combine them great yet. So going into stormwater treatment, currently we have requirements from local councils and the state planning policy, and I'm going to be a little bit Southeast Queensland centric here. Basically, we have to implement water-sensitive urban design, or WSUD, or other stormwater treatment measures like proprietary devices and similar to demonstrate the reduction of annual pollutant loads. There are the four main ones there: TSS, TN, TP, and gross pollutants. Do not mention heavy metals because no one wants to know about it, apparently. And as I mentioned, oftentimes it's just your bog standard WSUD measures, bioretentions, wetlands, and in commercial and industrial development, you often see these proprietary systems that use a range of filter media. They're mechanical cartridges more often than not. And landscaping and stormwater treatment can often be disconnected. It is getting way better. We are here today talking about examples of how to make it better, but street trees remain a primary example of this disconnect. You can see right here, this is a great example. Planting more street trees is fantastic. However, oftentimes they're disconnected from drainage. So you can see the curb and gutter arrangement right there, and there's a little bit of fall from the footpath to the tree, but otherwise it's just really rain on ground. And this goes through to our standardized details for street tree planting as well. This one's from 2022. And as I just learned, that's incorrect. Thank you, Simon, wherever you are. But you can see that it's basically emphasizing the constrained nature of how we implement these street trees. It's not bringing in any other infrastructure, particularly drainage infrastructure, to create a more functional output. So what I'm going to talk about today is a development called Pelican Waters, and it's a high-end development on the Sunshine Coast. It's been going since 1989, and they've had 3,000 houses built since that time. And we've been the principal engineering consultants on it since 2016. Just for context, this is basically the northern version of Pelican Waters through here. It's called the Northern Lakes District, and then the Southern Lakes District is down through here, and it's nearing completion. We're in stage 5 of the Southern Lakes District, which is this orange area here. But in 2018, we started looking at some alternative options for treatment. To give you a bit of context, what happens at Pelican Waters is the stormwater is traditionally treated by bioretentions. Oftentimes it's at source. It's coastal, it's very flat, and by at source, I mean effectively we have to break up the broader catchment into smaller subcatchments to allow for the drainage to occur. Otherwise, your pipe size starts getting very substantial and your costs can be overrun quite quickly. We've also used some novel approaches in earlier stages as well, such as floating wetlands, which were quite effective at providing end-of-line treatment. But it really does come back to normally using bioretention. And the bioretention amenity at Pelican Waters is actually quite high. Where the depth of the filter media allows it, they implement street trees and they look quite good. The issue is these lots have traditionally sold dead last on a development where each stage sells out very, very quickly. And there's a lot of misconceptions associated with bioretention, such as flooding, vermin, snakes, and that's due to a lack of awareness, which is really being addressed by the implementation of educational signage in each of these systems. But what we think the core issue is that the premium lot price of land here really emphasizes that the people that want to build on this want to have full control over it. They want a blank slate, more or less. And there's significant costs to a developer when land doesn't sell. There's ongoing holding costs. So Pelican Waters asked us to start to think about some new options. And about this time, we started hearing about Citygreen. And I reached out to Ben and had a brief discussion on what that product is, what it's been doing, where it's been implemented throughout the world. And we came up with this very basic concept design. Basically, water comes in, there's a little bit of a forebay here to break up, and it will infiltrate down through. By no means a detailed output or anything like that, but really a conversation starter for the developer as well as council. So we met through with the developer and they like the idea of, effectively a bioretention that's more or less kind of underground, but is promoting enhanced street tree growth. And then we met with the Sunshine Coast Council. And I have to say, the council was phenomenally collaborative. They required a lot of conservatism to be put into the first detailed design iteration, which I completely understand because they would be inheriting these assets. So what I'm about to show you is a vast change from the simple concept approach here to our detailed design option 1. So what we have is a fairly significant inlet structure where you've got basically 2 chambers more or less acting as one as a sump to hold some sediment back, which will then overflow into a secondary chamber, which then comes through into the tree planting area. We also got some great feedback from Citygreen as how best to arrange the soil within this system as well. So underneath where the tree grows, there's a planting media, which is Citygreen's specification. That's separated by jute mat, which will biodegrade over time, into the filter media that's similar to bioretention, but different. The hydraulic conductivity is a bit lower, and the nutrient content is a bit higher to facilitate the ongoing growth of the tree. A couple of the key issues that we saw, but understood the need to have this conservative level of detail through here are the depth of your soil right here on top of 200 mil of extended detention. So effectively, you've got 0.6 of a meter from where the tree is in the ground up until the grate there. And you'll see how that looks shortly. But from a plan view, you can see there's our tree grate. There's the planting media. It was a fairly significant inlet structure. But all through here is your filter media, where your stormwater treatment is occurring, and is also a sandy loam that's going to allow for that lateral growth of the tree roots to promote the formation of that appropriate root plate. So this is it under construction here, and we had a couple of different designs. So this is a 2 tree pit system, which is probably 25 to 30 square meters overall. You can see that initial inlet structure. It's fairly substantial. And what we did is we cored into the back of the curb there to then facilitate the water ingress coming through into that secondary inlet chamber, which would then flow through. Now, I don't have a picture of the trees when they went in, because this was just around COVID and everybody was sort of hiding out. But if you can imagine that street tree being 0.6 of a meter shorter and popping out right there. And the civil contract, our civil PM called me up laughing hysterically, and he said, "You better hope these work." Fortunately, we had great tree growth. That's a system that was planted, both of these, that was built in 2019. That's a year and a half later. So you can see we really did get significant growth. And as I mentioned, that tree is actually 0.6 of a meter taller than what you see through there. And what we're doing is we're testing the hydraulic conductivity and the infiltration of this system following construction. Because what we wanted to do, and what council were very open to, is amending the design to take out some of the conservative elements if we could have that proof of concept determined to be successful. So that brought us to our next one, and really not a significant change except for the removal of the inlet pit and the reduction of the depth in the topsoil and turf. What I didn't mention last time is we actually have a product called Hydro Rock that was put in there bounding the tree before water flows into the top of the filter media. Now, council suggested this product, and I know the guys that own Hydro Rock really well, as a means to prevent your fines that can be part of the runoff in the construction phase from migrating on top of the filter media. I will talk about that in a second. It did actually work too well. But one of the other things that we've implemented through here is you can see our subsoil drainage is 100 mil below the base. What we wanted to do there is establish a reservoir so that there could be a bit of water storage, passive storage occurring during drought. So wicking action can actually occur and the tree can take up some stored water in the event that we have a long period without rain. But we were able to reduce the depth of that soil substantially. So we went from nearly 600 millimeters deep to about to under 500. Again, and this is where the Hydro Rock is. So that's just bounding the tree there. The water comes in and percolates through the Hydro Rock. In theory, you can see that detail right there. And there's our inspection ports, and there's a inspection pit where it's basically an NBN pit without a bottom. So we can open that up and test the hydraulic conductivity of the system over time. So that's this version built. You can see it's fairly less obtrusive with the removal of that inlet grate there. And this was during a time of a pretty significant drought. We weren't having much rain at all. But this system, when it fills up in that area, it will then overflow into the sag pit. So as small as that looks, the original version was much, much worse. And that was put in late 2019. So what we found so far is that they weren't actually impeding sales whatsoever. That was our initial worry with the height of the tree and these ports here, that it might be some sort of impediment, but we saw no issue whatsoever. And with that, we could move to our final design. That last version that you saw was very, very functional. We were able to demonstrate that everything worked really, really well. Street tree health was fantastic, which I'll show in photos in a minute. But it allowed us to work, again, collaboratively with council, being able to demonstrate the success and start to remove, again, some of the conservative, more conservative design elements throughout there. So we've got a much more simplified inlet structure. So it's basically it's a prefab with inlet holes cored in, which you'll see in a minute. And we moved away from the hydro-rock block. What we were finding with that particular system is that it was holding too much water, and we're actually getting ferns and all these things starting to grow out of it. So it has great potential for things like green roofs, but it's actually not really letting water flow through laterally as well as we originally anticipated. So what we've done is we've put a screen through here that's going to prevent the migration of your larger organic matter and gross pollutants over to the top of the filter media, and again, reduce the depth of that topsoil through here, while simultaneously adding an impermeable membrane there and a bit of gravel there. And what that does is that prevents the water from running through the topsoil too quickly, allowing for that depth of topsoil to, again, be reduced, more consummate to what you see on your typical lawn. And moving to a prefabbed inlet system was a significant savings in cost. Very, very significant. We found the greatest cost with these systems was really all the formwork that was required during the civil construction phase. It was a very easy system to put together. When I first showed the civil contractor the plans, I wasn't sure I was going to walk out of the room alive. But when they got through and started putting them together, they rolled through them very quickly. There was absolutely no delay to this civil construction time frame whatsoever, which was fantastic. And now that we have this prefabricated approach, it's moving even quicker. And there's the stainless steel grate that just slots in there. One of the things Paul mentioned is the distribution of flow. That can be very tricky in an urban development, particularly in a flat one where you're trying to get grade. So what we've done here is we've got 3 openings that actually drain out onto blanks. And that reduces the flow velocity substantially and prevents scour within that root ball area. So water will flow here, hit that blank there, and then percolate in. And it works really, really well. And so you can see this is our current design with really a lot of value engineering added in. And it's very unobtrusive. The other thing that we did is we added those inspection ports into the actual grate. So we're removing those from being on the verge itself. So really, when somebody is driving by, all they see is this grate and the inlet pit. And so how did they function? These are photos from the second design iteration. So the first one we did, not that third one. They function extremely well. They take huge volumes of water that would otherwise be put down the drain and are promoting that street tree health while also providing stormwater treatment. And I want to give a big shout out to Dale Brown and Sally Bower of E2 Design Lab. They did a ton of pioneering work on street tree analysis by music, which I am not the hugest fan of. And to be honest, if I had to do it for this project, I wouldn't be up here today. But it allowed us to size these systems in a manner that would be acceptable to council and that could be demonstrated that it would be compliant with the state planning policy. So they functioned incredibly well, but the growth was phenomenal. So all of these street trees were planted at the exact same time, and this is 1 year of growth. Now you can just see the build out of the canopy on the 2 street tree systems is significantly greater than this here. And there's obvious signs of health. And this is after only 1 year. Bear in mind too that this is about 400 mil in the ground, so significantly higher than this tree as well. This is just from January 2024 when we were doing the off maintenance and handing the assets over to council. What we did at this time is we removed all the hydro-rock blocks. We found that they were, in addition to having a lot of plants growing on them that weren't intended to be there, they were shifting around a fair bit. And that's likely because they're less buoyant than the water that's coming through. So their initial activity is to float until they absorb enough water. And what they're doing is they're moving a little bit to block these. So what we did is we moved all those through and ran water truck tests through there and had absolutely no loss of infiltration. And that was compounded by detailed soil tests done by a geotech engineer that looked at both the field and lab-based hydraulic conductivity. Here's a nice aerial view of the stage where we implemented our second detailed design. You can see these trees through here. They're starting to match this growth rate that's been there historically for some time, and in a far more rapid period than what this took to establish to this state. So we're starting to see, not clearly the canopy cover that we want, but we're looking at a mechanism that is improving street tree health while simultaneously treating stormwater and achieving the requirements of local councils and the SPP. So in terms of cost, it is more expensive than the bioretention systems. Bioretention systems at Pelican run about $500 per meter squared. They can tend to be more embellished, whereas these systems are roughly about $1,000 per square meter, but that cost has come down significantly with the latest design iteration and moving to the prefab. So it's probably around the $800 per square meter mark. But we found that the operational expenditure is fairly negligible. There hasn't had to be any system that's ripped up. No tree has had to been replaced. All the hydraulic conductivity matches the original spec. And it's been really resilient to construction runoff. We worked with Citygreen to over-engineer the grates so they would be resilient to your house builders, because that was a key concern of council. They implemented a whole raft of tree pit bios down at the Sunshine Coast Hospital, and the grates were routinely damaged during the construction phase. So the design really was resilient to that activity in particular. You can see just another view of how significant that tree growth has been in a relatively short amount of time. So that's roughly 4 and a bit years, and this is January of this year. And again, we were punching out pretty huge volumes of water to demonstrate that it would take all this up with no overflow. So all these systems have been handed over to council with off maintenance. We did have to do some pruning. Melaleucas are a little bit notorious for that, but apart from that, there was no additional intervention that was required. And obviously the benefits are a really high amenity outcome. Everybody likes to see a large street tree in their front yard, and that was demonstrated here in the fact that there's been no loss to sales whatsoever. Sales at Pelican Waters have never gone slow. At one point they were doing a lottery system where, if you could get a lot, you were lucky. It was pretty random, except for the bioretention ones. They would not sell. That has not been the case with the implementation of these street trees. And obviously, as you can see from the photos, we've seen those improved growth rates, and we're getting that stormwater treatment happening at the exact same time. And clearly, a greater canopy cover is going to contribute to urban cooling, which, as we know, is a critical thing that we need to tackle. And not only from a climate change perspective, but from a public health perspective as well. And it improves property values. There's studies across the globe that show a healthy street tree growth in an urban development contributes to higher property values. I did a pretty high level sort of analysis across Australia, and I think the lowest one was Perth, and that was around $16,000 added to the property value, whereas Sydney and Brisbane were significantly higher. So this is a final view of one of our newest systems being constructed, and I just thought it'd be worth showing the extent of this system is pretty much right through there. They're anywhere from 15 to 25 to 30 square meters overall, but all you see in the end is just a tree growing and a grate. So the developer's been extremely happy. Council has been happy to have taken these systems off maintenance. So it's been a real win-win. And we implemented this system all the way up in Harvey Bay as well, in a development called Lakes on Gattaker. And really the council up there just took one look at the design. We showed them photos of our latest design down in Pelican Waters and gave it an approval because their big focus as well is improving street tree health. So It's been great to present today, and I look forward to being part of the panel for questions.